March 5th. It's a date, it carries a lot of weight historically.
Right.
This is the anniversary of the 1933 German elections, the ones that brought the Nazis to power. We're diving deep into this election today to really try and grasp how German politics shifted so dramatically.
It's crucial to begin with Germany in the early 1930s.
Okay.
A nation reeling from the Great Depression and caught in political gridlock. The Weimar Republic was really struggling, deadlock after deadlock in parliament.
Okay, so a backdrop of economic hardship and a government unable to function. That sounds like a recipe for extremism.
Exactly. People were desperate for solutions, for a scapegoat, for a strong leader promising a way out. Extremist parties like the Nazis, they understood this, and they were ready to capitalize on it.
And the Nazis, well, they were never known for subtlety, were they? I mean, they had a propaganda genius in Goebbels. But what else were they doing to grab this opportunity?
Goebbels was brilliant. He crafted narratives, used radio and film to spread the Nazi message. Everywhere, he tapped into those anxieties, turning economic hardship into scapegoating and fear. But it wasn't just words, there was brute force, too.
So they combined this masterful storytelling with actual intimidation.
Absolutely. Figures like Goering, he controlled the Prussian police. They were key to silencing dissent. They used the police to disrupt meetings, censor publications, even arrest opponents. It created this climate of fear. Speaking out against the Nazis carried real risks.
That's chilling. So they controlled the narrative in the streets, but there was also that fire. The Reichstag fire, what role did that play?
Pivotal. Picture this. February 1933, the Reichstag building up in flames. The Nazis immediately blamed the communists, using the fire to justify a huge crackdown.
So whoever actually started it, it became this perfect excuse for the Nazis to grab even more power.
Precisely. The Reichstag fire decree, passed in the wake of the fire. It allowed the Nazis to arrest and detain anyone they saw as a threat. Imagine that. They could silence anyone they wanted, label them a threat, eliminate opposition.
This all sounds incredibly calculated, like a step-by-step plan to seize control. It makes you wonder, did voters really understand what they were voting for?
Historians still debate that. What we do know is the election results themselves, they tell an interesting story. The Nazis, despite the aggressive campaign, the intimidation, the fire, they still didn't get a majority.
Wait, so despite all that, they didn't win outright? I always assumed they had a majority from the start.
It's a common misconception. They won about 44% of the vote. Significant, yes, but not a complete takeover.
Wow. So how did they go from a significant but not majority victory to actually forming a government and taking control?
That's where things get even more intriguing. The Nazis, under Hitler, formed a coalition government with the Nationalist Party. This gave them a foothold, but their real masterstroke was yet to come. Weeks after the election, they pushed through the Enabling Act.
The Enabling Act. I've heard it mentioned, but never really grasped it. What was it? How did it play into their plans?
Imagine the rule book is tossed out, and Hitler gets to write his own rules. That's essentially what the Enabling Act did. It neutered the Reichstag, gave the government power to pass laws without parliamentary approval.
So even though they didn't have the majority of votes, they found a legal way to bypass the entire system and give themselves absolute power.
Essentially, yes, a legal coup disguised as a measure for national stability.
It's mind-blowing, really. A party without a majority, exploiting a crisis, maneuvering themselves into absolute power. It's a chilling reminder of how fragile democracy can be.
And a stark warning about recognizing those warning signs early on.
We just saw how the Nazi Party, even without that majority win, they managed to get themselves in position for a complete takeover. It's fascinating, but also terrifying how they pulled it off.
It's key to understand their strategy had like multiple layers to it. They were working the legal system, yeah, but at the same time, they were dismantling any opposition. The Communist Party, already targeted, was quickly outlawed.
Right.
They used the Reichstag fire as justification, claimed they were a threat to national security.
So with the communists gone, did they just turn their attention to the Social Democrats, their other main rivals?
Absolutely. While not immediately banned, the Social Democrats face huge pressure. Their meetings disrupted, publications censored, leaders arrested. Essentially, any ability to oppose the Nazis was stripped away.
Classic divide and conquer.
Yeah.
It's chilling how systematic they were in silencing dissent. But their control went beyond just parties, right? They infiltrated other parts of German society as well.
Exactly. Think of the pillars of any society. Trade unions, the civil service, universities. The Nazis infiltrated and took control of them all.
Wow.
Trade unions were dismantled, replaced with Nazi-controlled organizations. The civil service purged of anyone deemed disloyal, and universities were brought under strict ideological control.
So they were reshaping the very fabric of German society in their image. And all of this happened within months of the election.
That's right. It was rapid, comprehensive, made possible, as we discussed, by the Enabling Act. Passed just weeks after the election, it effectively handed Hitler dictatorial powers.
It's almost unbelievable how quickly they went from plurality to absolute power. This Enabling Act, it seems like the linchpin in their plan. What did it let them do specifically?
The Enabling Act basically gave Hitler the ability to bypass the Reichstag, enact laws with no real parliamentary approval. He could even enact laws that violated the existing Weimar Constitution.
So it was a legal blank check, legitimizing their takeover.
Exactly. A legal maneuver, yes. But the consequences were huge. It cemented Hitler's absolute control, and it marked the end of the Weimar Republic.
What about the other parties? The ones they initially formed a coalition with? Did they just stand by and watch this happen?
The Nationalist Party, led by Alfred Hugenberg, they were initially under this illusion that they could control Hitler, moderate his more extreme tendencies.
Right.
Of course, they were tragically mistaken.
Sounds like they underestimated Hitler's ambition and his ruthlessness.
Indeed. As the Nazi grip on power tightened, the Nationalist Party was gradually sidelined and eventually dissolved completely. Members were either absorbed into the Nazi Party or just silenced.
So within a year of that election, the Nazis had eliminated any real political opposition, taken control of key institutions, and established a one-party state. It's a stark illustration of how quickly democracy can be dismantled when vigilance fails.
It certainly highlights the fragility of democratic institutions and the need to safeguard them against those who would exploit them. But the Nazis' consolidation of power went even further. Their ideology, it was built on exclusion and hatred. They soon turned their attention to specific groups within German society.
This is where the story takes an even darker turn, right?
Yeah.
They began systematically targeting Jews, political opponents, LGBTQ individuals, others they deemed undesirable.
Exactly. What began as discrimination and targeted violence would eventually culminate in the horrors of the Holocaust. This chilling trajectory underscores the danger of unchecked hatred and the critical importance of combating prejudice and discrimination in all its forms.
We've traced the Nazi Party's rise from, a minority party exploiting chaos to a regime with absolute power. It really makes you wonder how a nation of people could fall prey to such a horrific ideology. Where do we even begin to unpack the lasting impact of all this?
It's a question that has haunted, everyone. Historians, philosophers, all of humanity, really, for decades now. The consequences of the Nazi regime, they're almost impossible to grasp. The Holocaust, the extermination of 6 million Jews, it stands as perhaps the most horrific crime against humanity in history.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the only atrocity. Millions more. Political opponents, LGBTQ individuals, Roma, people with disabilities, they were persecuted, murdered.
It's a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty, the dangers of unchecked hatred, intolerance, and the impact of World War II, instigated by the Nazis. It reverberated across the globe. Millions dead, entire countries in ruins.
The war's end in 1945, it marked the defeat of Nazi Germany. But the scars, they run deep. The world grappled with the sheer scale of the crimes. And the legacy of the Holocaust, it continues to shape how we understand human nature, the fragility of civilization.
In the aftermath, there was this global reckoning. Individuals, institutions, they had to be held accountable for their roles in the Nazi regime. The Nuremberg trials, prosecuting Nazi leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, they set a precedent for international justice.
And within Germany, a profound process of denazification began. The goal was to purge Nazi ideology from society, dismantling institutions, removing former Nazis from power, educating future generations about the horrors of the past.
This denazification, it sounds like a huge undertaking, trying to rebuild a nation physically and morally.
It was, and still is, a long and complex process. The debate on how to best confront this legacy, it's still ongoing. How do you rebuild trust? How do you teach future generations to recognize those warning signs without perpetuating hatred? Questions Germany has wrestled with for decades.
It's a reminder that dealing with the aftermath of such a regime, it isn't just about trials and textbooks. It's about a fundamental shift in a nation's soul.
And maybe even more importantly, it's a reminder that the seeds of hatred and intolerance that allowed the Nazis to flourish, they can still be found today.
Absolutely. We see the rise of extremist ideologies, the scapegoating of minorities, the erosion of democratic norms all over the world. It's a stark reminder that the lessons of the Nazi era, they're not just historical artifacts, they're warnings for our present, our future.
It's a call to be vigilant, to actively combat prejudice and discrimination, to defend the values of tolerance, inclusivity, respect for human dignity, the values that were so brutally violated by the Nazis. Those values, they aren't guaranteed. They need to be nurtured, protected.
This deep dive has been a sobering journey. From the political and economic turmoil of 1930s Germany to the rise of a horrific regime and the devastating legacy it left behind. But it's also been a call to action, a reminder of our responsibility to stand up against hatred, to safeguard the freedoms that were so hard-won, and to never forget the lessons of the past. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.